So I am Sydney. I am a 6-year PhD candidate in the Department of History, as Caitlin pointed out. And I want to point out this is our 5th annual Comic Scholars Roundtable. So we've been doing it for 5 years, and I'm so happy that CXC and Billy and Caitlin are so supportive of grad research here at CXC. So where's the clicker? Is this the clicker?
Yeah.
Okay. I primarily research romance comics, and I also make comics in graphic medicine, which are not romantic at all, but Cole's laughing. But I want to move on and introduce our panelists so that we have plenty of time to hear about their work. So Cole, can you raise your hand? This is Cole Graham. He is a PhD candidate in the history of art. He has received his MA from OSU in 2023, where he is currently researching the intersection of gender and disability in 20th century painting and interrogating modernistic tendencies towards purity and efficiency. Cole has brought disability studies to bear on the work of Robert Rauschenberg and is now researching the expressionist Egon Schiele. He has also published on visual constructions of monstrosity in popular culture, particularly manga. Paddy McCabe, Paddy, raise your hand, is a 5th-year PhD candidate in the English department, focusing mainly on comic studies, film studies, contemporary fiction, and environmental humanities. He is currently writing a dissertation on recent climate narratives across a range of media and is especially interested in how these narratives traffic in Brechtian aesthetics and other forms of experimental narrative construction. Last but not least, we have Ruth Oliwe. Did I say that right? Okay. She is a 5th-year PhD candidate in STEM education in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Educational Studies, College of Education and Human Ecology. She is known for her creative and distinctive research methods in examining the development of Black girls' mathematics identity and agency across global contexts, particularly the United States and Nigeria. She employs multimodal approaches such as comics and digital storytelling in her research work. Drawing on her experiences in both Nigeria and the United States, Ruth designs community-engaged storytelling-centered learning spaces that position students to connect their mathematical knowledge and skills to their lived experiences, families, and communities. This approach not only helps students exercise their mathematical agency, but also challenges traditional framings of global mathematical knowledge and learning, inspiring a more open-minded approach to the subject. Okay, so now we're going to open up with each of the scholars talking about their topic and interest and how comics in particular allows them to achieve their objectives as scholars. And we're going to start with Cole because we're going in alphabetical order.
So, hi everybody. My name is Cole Graham.
Let me know when you want me to change.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Like Sydney said, I'm from the History of Art department. I feel like it's a little bit funny that I'm starting because I am a little bit the odd person out in that my research doesn't necessarily hinge on comics, but does take into account, I think, many different ways of constructing monstrosity visually, and manga and comics kind of fit naturally within that sphere for me. So typically when I talk about this portion of my research, which I began probably about 3 years ago now, I start by talking about like what manga is, and I'm sure all of you know that, and I start talking about start by talking about Full Metal Alchemist, the manga that I really created this paper and research project around back in 2022. But again, I think most everyone probably is at least passingly familiar with this, incredibly popular manga. Ran for 108 chapters, a decade. There were 2 animes, live action movie, tons of things about it. And so you can go ahead and go to the next one if you'd like. So. I happen to think that the popularity of Full Metal Alchemist is really remarkable for a number of reasons. One is the centrality of disability to Hiromu Arakawa's to the narrative she's crafted, the way she visually indicates that, and the way that this story really offers the possibility for disabled subjectivities that don't necessarily find resolution in cure. And I think along with this, there's this really interestingly articulated, these roles of like, the way I put it, like race, space, and place. And I find myself thinking about really the multimodal reading that this work offers on like racial anxieties and possibilities that aren't really made explicit in the image text synthesis that we see here, but the sort of like anxieties and potentialities that we see with disability, I think also kind of in here within race as well, all like coming together in different ways of portraying and working through monstrosity. So here on the screen, anyone who's familiar at all with the story knows the chimera, or what I call the composite monster. This is probably one of the most well-known chapters in that it's very distressing because we have this little girl whose father really literally creates a chimera out of her, so she is like becomes a human like dog hybrid. And I something I always point out here is in this particular image, we just have like these very like spiky, like almost like flame-like lines that look very off-putting, and we see this really dark figure that we don't see any particular like limbs or facial features. They're just very very creepy, very scary, and I kind of describe the way all this works together is creating like this feeling of like disgust come pity. And I'll have you go to the next slide, Sydney, just so I don't. And then the other monster in this particular story, right? We have the homunculus, or the false human. And what we have going on here is, rather than a composite where we have someone that is two things at once, and that's very disturbing to us, we have someone who appears to be something they're not, right? The wolf in sheep's clothing, and I, in my research, tie this to ideas of passing as non-disabled, like white passing, all of passing as your as cisgender, all of these different possibilities, and how they tend to, I think, distress and disturb people because it plays into these anxieties that we might see someone and not be able to know exactly who they are right away. So you can go to the next one, and just to give you an example, the character before this is this is what they actually look like. So it's like a very scary threat that you might see someone that looks like a normal person, but then there's something you don't understand about them, and this just plays into so many different kinds of difference, but all these different ways that that difference exists, across the human population. And then finally, the last slide. So I really take a look at all of this through the idea of the fusion monster. These are these two kinds of monsters that have been put forth, and it feels to me that the chimera is really an example of this fusion monster of two things, and the fission monster being two things but not at the same time, you can at once appear human, but then also be a monster. So kind of like this slippage back and forth of humanity and monstrosity. And just to get with the this particular work, I drew on as well the fact that these anxieties aren't new, right? I'm looking at these, looking at this new forms of 36 ghosts, 1889 to 92, and already we see these stories and these visual depictions of the sort of fears that I'm talking about, like the earth spider being being like a human spider hybrid, and and then we see this like ogre taking on the form of an old woman and using that to like wreak havoc. So I think these sort of anxieties are really deeply held, not only, of course, within Japanese lore, but we see similar things in in the United States and other places, and yeah, I think monstrosity in general is just this very capacious term that allows us to inhabit possibilities. And I guess what I really think is that the like monster's threat is also like a disruptive potential that lies in this deep-seated ability to deceive, to appear to be what it is not, and to frustrate attempts at legibility. And I think attending to Fullmetal Alchemist monsters, manga's monsters, and monstrosity more generally really will help equip us to better think and search beyond traditional ways of like knowing and being, and really help us to form alliances across like traditional ontologies. So.
Thank you, Cole. That was really, really good. And next we have Paddy talking about environmentalism in comics.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Paddy. As Sydney said, I'm in the English department here at Ohio State. Similarly to Cole, I also feel like ever so slightly out of place in this panel, because really what I've been working on is more like in the realm of cultural studies generally, which of course includes comics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about comics right now or in just a few moments. But what I've been working on kind of is culture and narrative as it relates to this issue of climate change, an issue that I and many other people see as something that already is in some ways and is likely to be one of the kind of defining problems of the 21st century. So something I believe about culture broadly is that I don't think like really individual artworks have much power onto themselves when it comes to changing the world, changing our behaviors, whatever. But I do think culture generally taken as a kind of collective gestalt does produce certain psychologies, certain attitudes, certain expectations about the world. I think the things that we see as normal, the things we see as familiar, and the way that we orient ourselves to those things are in many ways produced by culture, by narratives, how we narrate certain things. And I think with climate change, this is kind of like an especially potent topic, because climate change is itself in some ways a story. When we talk about it, we talk about who the main actors are, what things are already happening, what things will happen. It is kind of like a narrative onto itself. So as somebody who is in English and who looks at narratives, especially graphic narratives, I'm interested in how we narrate the issue of climate change. Specifically, I'm interested in how we've narrated it recently. Because climate change is something that has kind of been in the cultural consciousness in some way or another since the 1980s, but didn't really become a very widespread, widely known thing until the 90s or the early 2000s. I think for many of us, it was Al Gore's The Inconvenient Truth and Inconvenient Truth that kind of like woke us up to the issue of climate change. And something I've perceived in my research is that the way we narrate this issue has changed quite recently. I think very recently, the kind of structure or feeling around climate change, the kind of collective vibe we have towards the issue, has become more dreadful, more terrified, in some ways more hopeless than it ever has before. And I think a big reason for that is something that we can kind of think about as climate change deadlines. The most famous climate change deadline, probably, or at least the most publicized one, was the Paris Agreement, which we've probably all heard of. This kind of came into effect. Many countries signed onto it at the time, including the United States, in 2015, or officially it came into effect in 2016, but it kind of began in 2015. And famously, this agreement said to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, greenhouse gas emissions must peak before 2025 at the latest and decline 43% by 2030. It's 2025 already. Gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions have very much not peaked. While there's some signs that they could peak soon, nobody really knows if that's going to happen anytime soon. And the idea that they could decline 43% by 2030 seems similarly maybe out of the range of what's realistic. This is all made a little bit worse, I think, or at least for many of us, certainly not for everyone, but for many of us, by the fact that Donald Trump, who took the United States being one of the main greenhouse gas polluters, that Donald Trump took us out of the Paris Agreement shortly after he was elected back in 2016, and now in his second term has kind of brought back this longtime Republican mantra of drill, baby, drill, so kind of signaling that he has, and the rest of his administration, has no intent whatsoever about doing anything about climate change at all. But even the way many climate activists narrate this issue and talk about this issue is in itself, historically, has been not overly productive. I mean, we might remember this art installation from 2020, this climate clock that went up in Times Square, that kind of just had a countdown that was meant to represent the time we had remaining to do something until the effects of climate change became irreversible, based on research from the Mercator Institute in Berlin. It's a neat art piece, but I think what it does wrong, rather, is there's really no context for what this means, like what it means when this clock gets down to zero, which is not good because we want more context about what it actually means when we do get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think the way this has been messaged in a lot of spheres is that once we get to this threshold, like all is lost, all is hopeless, and it's not worth doing much of anything at all, which isn't true. Even 3 degrees Celsius of warming would be, catastrophic, but that's better than 4. 4 is better than 5. So there are reasons to, I think, be skeptical of how this issue historically has been kind of messaged to the public. If you want to go to the next slide, I mean, people might remember this episode from The Newsroom from season 3. The actor Paul Lieberstein in this scene likens climate change to a house fire in which everyone has already perished due to a too slow response. So just one example of kind of what I'm talking about, one way of messaging this issue in a way that doesn't seem particularly helpful and actually doesn't map onto the reality of climate change and projecting climate change, which is in fact quite uncertain. So if you want to go to the next slide, something I've perceived over the last 10 or so years, it's a little fuzzy, a little inexact, but a lot of climate narratives recently have taken after Bertolt Brecht and Brechtian aesthetics in the way that they have decided to narrate this issue. I'm having trouble, honestly, finding climate change narratives before 2015 that traffic in these aesthetics in the same way. So if you don't know Bertolt Brecht, he was a 20th century playwright who had this idea about what he called epic theater and as it contrasted with Aristotelian classical theater. So whereas classical theater and much 19th century realist theater that would have been something that Bertolt Brecht kind of was influenced by as well, or not influenced by, but saw a lot of when he was kind of coming up. That type of theater kind of seeks to absorb the audience members into the plot It tries to produce a certain identification with characters, and it tries to stimulate a lot of emotion around what you're seeing. This is a type of narrative that I think is still kind of dominant across many media formats, but what Bertolt Brecht thought you should do in order to produce a more kind of critical, political, intellectual orientation to the content was to employ what he called alienation effects, any kind of formal device that could kind of create a chasm between the audience and between what was being depicted on stage, between the characters. And in doing so, kind of strip away emotion and promote a more kind of intellectual orientation to what was on the stage. Bertolt Brecht was a big Marxist, so his main goal was to kind of produce like a class consciousness that he thought was, and that which Marxists in general see as essential to the final stage of history, like being communism or whatever. But these same ideas can be mapped onto environmentalist texts. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is one very recent, I don't know if you could really call it a comic, but picture story, cartoon story by the artist Bill Watterson. Also, the images were co-created by the caricaturist John Cashed. And without giving like too in-depth of a close reading with these, you can kind of see that they produce this uncanny feeling of alienation. I mean, even the human figures in the far left image here, the marks on these figures are kind of foregrounded. Their status as a human-made construction is kind of foregrounded, very much in keeping with Brechtian theory, with Brechtian narrative. The humans here are kind of made to be unfamiliar to the human audience. In the middle slide, we can see this kind of depiction of fossil fuel culture. You know, we have highways, cars, planes, etc. And the image is produced in this kind of weird, eclectic mix of styles that, again, in itself produces this feeling of alienation, I think, kind of seeks to take these familiar things that we take to be very normal in 21st century society and 20th century society as well, modernity, I guess you could say, and to make them feel unfamiliar, to kind of get the audience to look at them as odd things that are worth critiquing rather than things that make up the most basic texture of everyday life. If you want to go to the last slide, I'll wrap it up with this. This is another text, not necessarily a climate change text, but certainly an environmentalist text from Maggie Umber's Sound of Snow Falling. And Maggie Umber does a lot of environmentalist work, but she, in general, traffics in an aesthetic that I would call Brechtian. Unlike most comics, these images are not necessarily reducible in the way that we have come to expect with kind of like the standard sort of comics. They really do make the reader work, kind of, again, like setting up this chasm between audience members and the content in a way that I think does provoke a kind of more critical orientation to what we're actually seeing. So yeah, I mean, that's basically what I do, what I've been doing.
Thank you, Paddy. Great work. And now we have Ruth who's going to talk about math and comics.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ruth. So I'm a fourth year, actually not fifth year, but thank you.
Oh, sorry.
PhD candidate in STEM education, focusing on, I like to say the M in the STEM. Yeah, I was once a research associate on the digital mathematics storytelling, but now I'm a teaching associate. Next slide. So this kind of captures everything about me. I'm from Nigeria. I grew up in Lagos, but it's not my ancestral home, but I grew up in Lagos. Kind of gives the New York, LA vibe, so you can, that's why that image is very chaotic, a lot of things happening in the bus. I come from a family of 5, and yeah, and third generation educator. I'm always proud of that. My mom is a teacher, my grandfather was a teacher and like superintendent in the district, so kind of fun. I'm interested in working with Black girls. I love traveling. If I'm not in my office working, you can always catch me at a coffee shop doing 1 or 2. Next slide. And yeah, so a lot of people, when I say math and comics, they're like, what's the connection? How did you get yourself into this? Growing up, I remember anytime my dad went to the gas station, he would get us, I don't know how many of us are familiar with Super Strikers. It's a soccer-themed comics, South African-based, I think. And I grew up. My brothers and I, we always fought over it, who gets to read the latest issue. But then, like, you know, as kid, I didn't know, looking back now, I didn't know how much impact that had on me as a child, because when I got to college and I started teaching kids mathematics, I was kind of uncomfortable because I saw how they struggled with math, especially word problems, and particularly girls. Like, they, even before they tried, they already had this notion that they couldn't do it. And as someone who once struggled with mathematics, I understood where they were coming from, and I felt I couldn't just, dismiss that. And I was like, okay, how do I help them? I decided to start writing stories. I thought I could get books for them, but when I look at the books around me, they were very westernized. Like, when I say westernized, it doesn't relate to the context that we were in. Like, for example, miles, pounds, we use naira, and then we use kilometers. So I was also uncomfortable with that. Then when I decided that, yes, I would write the stories myself, I was like, okay, what way? I wanted something different. Then I like, oh yeah, Super Strikers. I'm going to start creating comics, but I don't know how to draw. So I went online. I started searching like all kinds of comics maker until I found the one I was very comfortable with, that at least could get my ideas expressed. So I started creating comic stories and using them with my comics and with my students, and they really appreciated that I was taking the extra step of connecting mathematics to their context. And so I did a project called LIMAT, Learning Mathematics Through Storytelling. So I went to a nearby school. I told the teacher, I told the principal, I know you do mathematics Monday to Friday. How about I come in on Monday and introduce the topic you want to do with stories that I've created and engage the student? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. So I did that, and the students loved it. They got to create their own comics, hand-drawn. And they were like, I remember one kid telling me, oh my goodness, I've always wanted to be an author. Thank you for giving me this chance. And that blessed my heart. And so, yeah, next slide. So like, some of these quotes really ground what I do, who I do it for, why I'm doing what I do, and the power of stories. And okay, another quote that is missing here is from the Story Center. It says, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And I really believe that, because if I start telling you more of my story, you could be like, oh yeah, me too. And then before you know it, the distance between us has gapped a little bit. So before I start talking scholarly, I know that I'm in math. So whenever you hear me say math identity, I'm actually talking about how students see themselves in mathematics, how they perceive their ability, which is shaped by a lot of things, by a lot of like their other identities, or maybe teachers, peers, or parents. And when I say math agency, I'm just referring to the behavioral part of math identity, how they use their mathematics knowledge and skills to do others. So a little backstory why I put this. So in the spring of 2024, I told my advisor then that, I think for my dissertation, I really want to focus on like use comics as a medium. And he was like, so have you been to the Billy Island? And I was like, yeah, I do pass. I do like, and he was like, you can't come to the Ohio State without working with the Billy Island Cartulary region. So I came, I met Caitlin, and I told her, so this is the idea that I have. I know it's something powerful, but I have no idea how to go, really move forward with this. So I did my research apprenticeship here. I had to study lots of comics, but I really appreciate that experience because it really moved me towards what I wanted to achieve. So I noticed that whenever I read non-STEM comics, it really grounded the idea of identity. But when I read STEM comics, it was more about, we have a task, we have to solve it. This is the formula, this is the answer. And I was like, no, as an educator, if our goal is to help students develop critical thinking, problem-solving skills, you can embed the problem, but don't give them the answer. Then what opportunities do you have them to come in and share their own ideas? So I had this tension, and I was like, okay. Yes, I admit in my earlier comics, I used to do that, but reading about it and reading like non-STEM comics, how like Aya of York City, Freezy, how they really embedded like the concept of identity. I said, okay, moving forward, I'm going to do my comics like this. For grounding, identity experiences, lived experiences, but also leaving space for students to come in with their own mathematical thinking and all that. So yeah, these comics, like if you notice, students believe that, oh, I don't use math in real world, but they actually engage with math even without thinking. And I really love this because it's open-ended. You could say, how did page come about 72? Tell me, like, use your manipulatives, share your thinking. And then there's also a last question that doesn't give an answer, which as an educator, you can also come in and, engage your students no more. So for my research, I'm actually working with Black girls. I'm using comics. And also connect the stories to issues in our community. And this is my goal, robust mathematics, identity, and agency. So what I do is I come in, like when I'm working with Black girls, I come in with comic stories that I've created, my own experiences. Like I see myself as a weaver or I thread stories, right? From my own experiences as a Black girl, from stories of other Black women I've heard, or even in history, and okay, how do I weave this nicely? And then I come into that space with that stories, and I also embed like mathematical problems, but like I described, leaving them open-ended for the girls to also engage and share their own stories, and also like address, even like going into the community, identifying problems, addressing them using their mathematical skills, but using comics to also illustrate this, that if I give you, what will you understand? Like, what is your takeaway? And yeah, so a lot of people have asked me, why comics? Why not poetry? Why not like journaling? But one thing I found out is that with comics, there's this extra emotional connection that it really gives that I've not really like seen in other medium. And also the concept of the gutter, I love using that in my comics because there is this pulling in that it gives that students respond with their own stories. And as a researcher, by the time I start unpacking what those stories are, it's coming from their community, from their family. Scholarly, we call it community wealth of knowledge, like how they navigate this life, how they navigate being a person, which can be linguistic, aspirational, or knowledge from their families and histories. Like, no, not too much scholar stuff. But, yeah, and
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. So that's why I really appreciate the use of comics in my work. So I kind of like gave a sample of my own creations and also like a student response or a student comics now.
Wait, did everyone scan it? The one to scan it?
Oh.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a picture of everyone taking a picture.
So meta.
I know. Let me try it. Okay. Next slide.
Okay.
Oh,
And
we'll pull it up later.
oh yeah, so in the first comic story, I went to Nigeria last year, and I created this. I worked with like some youths in the community, and I created this story. It's short, but it's with a lot of passion because I wanted to engage girls in some critical discussions, uncomfortable discussions that, like, who gets to be an engineer? Just men? Women can be engineers too, right? And yeah, some other like math kind of embedded in this. And this was one of my first comics creation that I'm always proud of this because it's like I had an idea, I took a boot step, and I created something. And so here I was just like trying to foreground the concept of ratio and percentages. Like when your grandma comes to visit you and she brings all goodies, like how do you share them? Like Ideally, I know, like, if you have siblings, we're going to fight over it. But like grandma's saying, oh, okay, share it according to your ages and all, just to bring in that concept of ratio and all. And this one, it's a student comics illustrating their dreams and experiences in mathematics. Like, even without knowing this student, you can tell who plays a significant role in their mathematics learning. You can see their dreams. You can see a lot of things to unpack from the research end. And, you know, sometimes some of these things get missing in just like having an interview. But with comics, you can like, oh, you mentioned this, you made this move, why did you do so? So, yeah. So, next slide.
Next slide.
And I would like to say, in my language, dalu, which means thank you for listening.
Great. Okay, that was all really fantastic presentations. I know that Cole and Patty said they feel like they don't quite belong on this panel, but they do. I think that all these presentations show that comics Days is really interdisciplinary, and that and comics and manga can like just open up so many possibilities. Now I know we are close to end of time, and I want to know. But I have more questions, but I want to see if the audience has any questions. How's the audience feeling? Yep, the audience has questions. Okay, you. Sorry.
I have a question for Ruth.
Yeah.
You said you went to a school to test this idea of telling a story to help teach the students math on Mondays. So I was curious what age of the students you work with?
Oh.
And also for your comics, do you print them out to give to the students? Like how, or do you like send them an email with a PDF file? I was curious how you get the comics that you made to the students.
So for your first question, it was grade 4 to 6. Grade 4 and 6 combined, so they were like 10, 11. Yeah. In Nigeria when I started that project, and so right now sometimes I print. If it's back home, yes, I print, but you know, back home colored printing is really expensive, so I do it black and white, which pains me a lot. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I send them the link. If they have devices at home, they can just like appreciate the color more. Yeah, so
that's cool.
Yeah, but here I print most times.
Do we have another question? Yes.
It really, two observations. Love your presentation, what you're doing. I see your stuff as, there's so much in our culture right now about post-apocalyptic stories, you know, everything from The Walking Dead to other things.
Yeah.
But I see you as pre-apocalyptic. Is that genre unto itself now?
Maybe, because you're kind of right that like most climate narratives are very speculative in nature.
Right, the day after tomorrow and the world freezes or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And like most of the stuff I've been reading is kind of within that realm, but it's not primarily the things that I'm interested in. So you're right, like something kind of odd about what I've been working on is that it does, for the most part, these are texts that don't necessarily seek to forecast a climate future. It's kind of doing something different. I mean, the mysteries thing that I was by Bill Watterson and John Cash that I pulled up, that's more of like a parable. I know I didn't really summarize the story, but it's, you know, it's about like this weird medieval village, and they vanquish these things called the mysteries, and then their society starts to change in all these crazy ways, and it's all this big allegory for climate change and environmental destruction more broadly. But yeah. No.
But as a genre, there's a plethora of stories that can come out of that. Everything from the political aspects to the scientific aspects, to whatever. And on your, Cole, your presentation made me think that so much of what your characters are different aspects or different conditions of psychological issues. The schizophrenia. I'm one thing and I'm another thing in the same body. There's people that are incredibly depressed, you know, that sort of stuff. It's like the genre that you've tapped into is like doing stories about each or characters that are different aspects of psychological conditions. And it was a great presentation, all three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yours made me think of Hidden Figures and the coverage that
Oh,
we're getting
such a
in
great
media.
story. Such a great story. Yeah.
I think we are at about 10 minutes left, actually. We have more time than I thought. Okay, yeah, the one with the baseball cap, gray shirt.
Oh, me?
Yes, yes.
Sorry. I was a little late to this, because I missed the bus getting here. I'm all down at 4050 North High Street, the Commons area. He said that your manga is about viewing characters in psychological aspects. I'm on the low end. I am a functioning autistic, so is there a character or something like that that represents my demographic, of mental disability and all that? I'm just curious because again, I was 8 minutes late to this thing.
No, totally understand. The bus can be difficult. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I would pick out a character and be like, oh, this character represents someone who has schizophrenia, or this character necessarily is someone who has autism. Rather, I think there is a shared experience when it comes to maybe feeling monstrous, feeling like you don't fit into the world in a particular, in the way that maybe the others around you do. There's lots of different things that can cause this, and I do a lot of my work in disability studies. So thinking about mental illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD, neurodivergencies, right, like autism and ADHD. All of these things are experiences of difference that we have to navigate, and I think a lot of navigating them is finding a way to live in the monstrousness, or live in the monstrosity, being willing to be maybe a chimera, or something that is unreadable to someone else. So I don't know if that super answers the question, but I think that
It kind of helps a little.
yeah, no, I think that people with disabilities of all types have a huge role to play in how we encounter media in general, and comics in specifically. Yeah.
And if you're interested in looking into more representations in comics, you might want to check out publications that are in the field of graphic medicine.
Yeah.
There's a lot, and Cole, I would say your work fits in the field of graphic medicine too. We have time for one more question, but before we do that, I just want to say that you can find all of their web pages. They all have OSU web pages if you're interested in contacting them about their work. And if you are a grad student or know a grad student who researches comics or makes comics as part of their academic journey, please reach out to me. I'm always looking for new students to feature. And I will take one more question now. Yes, in the back.
This is a question for Cole. So when you're talking about how disabilities and other conditions can create sort of this monstrous feeling, I'm also thinking about in graphic novels, and using manga as an example. There's all of these really great stories, and one piece is this great epic that really contradicts that and says look at my shortcomings, I'm going to overcome this. And time and time again, I'm thinking of the cyborg guys. He could have just let himself keep going to pieces, but he overcame by thinking about ways that he could continue on. And you see this time and time again in that whole gigantic narrative.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what is your thoughts on this idea of the monsters transforming themselves into the hero?
Yeah, I am hugely both both within academic studies and just in my own things that I love, very, very moved by characters who find a way who have been cast as monstrous, finding a way to, to live into that is fulfilling for themselves, and, that also is maybe a destabilizing presence for those around them. And, that sort of destabilization feels incredibly valuable to me. So, yeah, I love that I love that you bring up One Piece. I love the idea of the cyborg, and part of this has to do, right, with, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, with like cyborg theory, but like, that originally, when this came, when it was introduced like 20-ish years ago, like the idea of like real bodies weren't really brought into cyborg theory. It was all very theoretical. And today we're looking at cyborgs as like actual disabled people who have actual bodies that perhaps, are using a prosthetic limb, or, or a voice box, or like I have like a spinal cord stimulator, things like that. So, really viewing the cyborg as something that might be useful in, looking at and moving through the world in new ways, because people really are cyborgs, and they're living right now. And so I think, yeah, in things like comics, manga, especially like these sort of like otherworldly sometimes stories give us the opportunity to really play out like what does it mean to be cyborgian, and like what is the promise and disruptive potential of that.
That was a great answer. Okay, so I have been asked to stop at 11, so we're at the end of the hour, but I want to take a moment to thank all of our grad students who presented wonderful work today.